And good morning to everyone out in the audience. Thanks for logging in to join this conversation today. I'm really looking forward to it. And I think that we'll all take away a lot from the conversation today. But before we get started, just some reflections as Tanya offered on the word resilience. In 2018, when I was working at Red Tomato, I joined a panel on resilience at the annual Farm to Plate gathering. It was a great conversation. I felt really good about my contributions. And looking back over the year we've just been through, I see how very, very little I actually knew on the topic. Kind of like one of my 10-year-olds telling me about marriage or complaining about Zoom meetings, even though that's probably pretty universal at this point. But this panel today, this conversation that we're going to have, gives us an opportunity to hear from 4 leaders across our region whose work can inform a living COVID-19 informed definition of food systems resilience for our region. But before we go to our panelists, I want to thank the fine staff, Summit Planning Committee, Karen Spiller and Liz Ogilvie for setting such a powerful stage last Thursday, but especially to Liz for calling out and reminding us that we can't talk about agriculture without talking about land. And we can't talk about land without talking about race. The same is true for resilience. For any who didn't already know that with their whole heart and mind before 2020, it's undeniable today that racial and environmental justice are at the heart of achieving food systems resilience. And in that same spirit of growth and critical reflection, I also want to take a moment here to thank my colleagues at the Center for Good Food Purchasing for helping me see how our national reckoning on race and movement level conversation falls short in terms of recognizing the Asian American, and Pacific Islander farmers, farm workers, chefs, business owners, advocates, and community members who are building this movement with us, while also working right now to protect their families and communities from racially motivated violence. So I'd especially like to welcome and appreciate the AAPI attendees at the FINE Summit today. Thank you for coming, and we're a stronger network and more resilient region for your contributions and insights. At the center, we work to support collaboration between policymakers, farmers, value chains, anchor institutions, and activated communities. And when this ecosystem comes into alignment through shared values, it builds power and tremendous potential to build resilience into our food system. Our panelists today bring wisdom and leadership from each of these sectors to our conversation today. So without further ado, I'm truly honored to introduce to you all Latha Swamy, Director of Food System Policy for the City of New Haven, Jesse Rye, Co-Executive Director of Farm Fresh Rhode Island, Commissioner Randall Liberty, Maine Department of Corrections, Reverend Mariama White-Hammond, founding pastor of New Roots AME Church in Dorchester and co-chair of Renew New England. Please also take a look at their bios in Whova to learn more about their work and their stories across our region. But for now, I'm really excited to dig into our conversation about resilience. When we were setting up this plenary, I had an idea that we might be able to arrive at a single definition of resilience. And in talking with these tremendous leaders that have joined us today, it occurred to me that what we actually need to hear is each unique life-informed definition of resilience. So I want to open the conversation simply by inviting our panelists to talk about what resilience means to you, and particularly the interrelationship between resilience and equity and how that shows up in your work. And I'd like to invite Reverend Mariama to kick us off.
Thank you. So I took a moment to think about resilience, and I use the definition, the ability to survive and thrive interdependently with your relations. But I think a lot of the way I frame my work is around the notion of ecological justice. This is not a rejection of anybody else's terms. I still do climate justice. I believe in environmental justice. All of those things are relative. But I use this because eco for me means home, and ecology is the study of home. And the field of ecology, what I think is most important is that it doesn't look at things separately. It looks at things in relationship. And for me, we've got a problem in our relationships. We've got a problem in all of our relationships. We've got sometimes problems in our relationships with ourselves, problems in our relationships. We're really the only species out there that has so much drama internally. We can't even seem to be in right relationship with folks whom we share 99% DNA alignment. And then there's the reality that we're not in right relationship with every other organism that makes it possible for us to live. I don't know how to make water. Last time I checked, I'm not capable of creating oxygen. So the idea that I would not be in right relationship with all the other organisms that make it possible for me to live seems fundamentally a problem. And so for me, our challenge is that we don't acknowledge we're in relationship, right? We just breathe. We don't even think about where it comes from and why it's possible. We drink water, and sometimes we don't even realize that that is not a foregone conclusion in many parts of our country and many parts of the world. The fact that we would pollute what we actually need to live seems completely wrong. We don't realize that we're in relationship with those who've gone before us and those who will come after us. And so for me, the challenge is at its fundamental level, getting our relationships right all across the board. Recognizing that we are in relationship even when we choose to ignore it. And then asking, how do we look at the distribution of needs and resources in a way that is just, in a way that you'd feel good about, the way that families should make a decision to make sure everybody has what they need. So for me, that's a global problem. It works out in our food system and environment, and also, but it also works out in who we choose to educate and who we don't, who we choose to incarcerate and who we don't, who we choose to lead and who we don't. All of those conversations are about right relationship and how we make sure everybody has what they need to survive and thrive.
Thank you so much. Next, if we could hear from Jesse at Farm Fresh.
Thanks, Laura. When I think of resilience, I immediately think of the fragility of Rhode Island's current food system. We're a state that's lost a tremendous amount of farmland to sprawl and development. Our farmland prices are some of the highest in the country. Farmers have traditionally been dependent on strong direct-to-consumer sales at farmers markets, farm stands at CSAs. And at the same time, our largest agricultural crop is sod. So the smallest state in the country is prioritizing much of its limited farmland to grow a product that's exacerbating the climate crisis, as well as exporting our topsoil. We're facing a crisis of land use, an aging farming population, and in many respects, clutching onto systems and structures that only work for few. In the face of these problems, I think resiliency means making smart and equitable investments in food system infrastructure. This will help our state withstand disruptions and recover more quickly from disasters. This means anticipating disruptions in our food supply and bolstering local and regional food value chains that can grow stronger as the possibility of food coming from places farther away becomes more expensive and unreliable. The tragedy of this past year was that COVID-19 was a public health crisis that could have easily been avoided and prevented, but it was ignored and mismanaged. The real pain, suffering, and loss as a result of this mismanagement has been felt disproportionately across cities and towns in Rhode Island, across our region, and across the country. It exposed much about our nation's current way of being. Racism is at the basis of America's entire agricultural economy. Growing food on land stolen from indigenous people and farms built on the labor or trade profits of enslaved people of African descent. In Rhode Island, the historical and modern forces of structural racism have resulted in an inadequate social safety net, has relegated many people, primarily of color, to low-paying jobs, lesser access to affordable housing, healthcare, and food. This past year, we saw firsthand the fragility and flaws in our food system during the pandemic. In particular, Our systems for food distribution and basic human needs were not as resilient as they could be. Not only were they not resilient, they were inequitable and disproportionate in their effectiveness. When I think of resilience, I think of public investment in food systems that benefit everyone. Needless to say, we have a long way to go.
Thanks for that, Jesse. And next, if we could hear from Latha in the city of New Haven.
Hi, thank you, Laura, and thanks everyone for having me here today. So when I think about the term resilience, I think about the variety of contexts that we can think about resilience in: economic, ecological, social, cultural, and how it means that it's the power or ability to return to the original form in the face of adversity. Resilience can often be seen as neutral or even purely a positive concept, but it's more nuanced than that. A look at recent history of the term illuminates why it's important to carefully choose our language and framing, especially when we're designing for equity. The term first became popular in the mid-20th century as psychologists began using it to describe people who remained well-adjusted after traumatic experiences. The concept then moved into engineering, where it was used to test the limits of systems. And by the 1970s, ecologists were using it to describe how complex systems adapt, transform, and self-organize. They found that in complex dynamic systems, it's more important to be flexible enough to expect the unexpected than to plan for specific risks in the system. However, the evolution and use of the term in the US can often disregard issues of social vulnerability and differing access to power, knowledge, and resources. Many Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC communities in the US deal with chronic adversity marked by systemic oppression and structural violence. Individuals and families are often encouraged to demonstrate perseverance regardless of the conditions in which they live. Essentially, they're being asked to model resilience. However, apparent positive adaptations displayed by BIPOC communities could be fostering greater, more damaging future vulnerabilities. I'd like more of us to think critically about how these processes of resilience may be imposing risks on BIPOC, low income, and other disinvested communities when they're expected continuously to adapt internally, but externally their adverse environments remain unchanged. Especially as a municipal official, I think it's my responsibility to not only encourage positive adaptations among individuals, but also very intentionally work to dismantle the very systems of oppression that necessitate this type of resilience in the first place. And we definitely center this across all of our projects, as I'll mention later on. So I guess I'd say that shallow promotions of resilience may be more harmful to our communities and our collective narrative than we actually expect. So I think we need to have a critical lens of what do we actually mean by resilience, and how is that impacting what we're designing around equity and systems and solutions for our communities.
Thank you so much for that call to action. Next, I'd like to hear from Commissioner Liberty in Maine.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I believe in the mission of Farmers institutions, and I'm pleased to support all the efforts that the organization does. As mentioned, I'm Randall Liberty, and I'm the Commissioner of Corrections in the state of Maine. I have 1,700 incarcerated Mainers in my care, and 6,500 individuals are on probation. Resiliency to me means overcoming obstacles, not only overcoming obstacles, but having a sustained, deliberate effort in overcoming obstacles. It means, for me, creating a culture of continuous improvement in my organization and in my community. My chosen profession in corrections has historically been based upon punishment and warehousing. Our system has been plagued by policies which purport to be tough on crime, and we've struggled under ever-increasing mass incarceration due to failed policies of deinstitutionalization of mental health facilities without proper community-based community funding. And we've also been plagued by the failed war on drugs, where we've had an attempt to arrest our way out of addiction, releasing residents into the community only to have them to overdose. We've struggled to adequately address the causation factors which bring people to our prison system: addiction, mental health, poverty, neglect, bias, trauma, and the disproportionate minority representation in our system. Resiliency to me is having a sustained effort to overcome these multi-generational mistakes and to redesign the correctional system in our approach. We do this in spite of the political pendulum swinging back and forth, in spite of other governmental funding priorities, and in spite of a strong correctional culture of punishment. We've begun this work through normalization and humanization for those who are incarcerated in our care. We do this through identifying what brought them to prison and to address those needs. We do this through education, programming, and through the belief of their self-worth. We do this through a lens of the belief of redemption. We currently have 120 college students attending the University of Maine. 3 of the residents are graduate students. 1 is pursuing a PhD, and the state and national recidivism rate, as we all know, hovers around 65%. Those individuals that have graduated from the University of Maine at Augusta in the Maine State Prison, there's only a 5% recidivism rate. Think about that for a moment. 65% recidivism rate for those individuals that are incarcerated without education and proper programming, and only 5% for those individuals that are informed and have educated themselves and have been in the process. Whatever your political spectrum may be, that's clearly success. We do this through the Liberation Institute, which we have taught 20 individuals to become nationally certified yoga instructors, bringing yoga into facilities and all the mindfulness and calmness that brings. We repair harm through restorative practices and through a veterans pod where 64 military veterans live, heal, and train service dogs for fellow combat veterans on the outside. We build resiliency through the elimination of solitary confinement and the reduction in the use of the restrictive housing by 300% over the last 6 years. We do this all through the pandemic. That is resiliency to me. Thank you.
Thanks so much for all of those contributions. And I think folks can understand why, featuring each of our speakers' insights and definitions of the word resilience feels like an important way to open and frame our conversation today. So Latha, I'd love to hear from your relatively unique role within municipal government and as a regional and international advocate for food justice. Could you talk about how your efforts to build community engagement and awareness leads to shifting power in New Haven and why that's critical for achieving food sovereignty?
Yeah, I have a few slides to kind of anchor us as I share a little bit more about New Haven. So just to give you all some context on New Haven is a small, diverse coastal city in southern Connecticut with deep and enduring economic and social disparities. Of New Haven's 130,000 residents, roughly 1/3 identify as Black, 1/3 as white, and 1/3 as Hispanic Latinx. Median annual income is around $38,000 as compared to $71,000 statewide. Half our residents are low income and a quarter are living in poverty. Prior to COVID across New Haven, almost a quarter of the city's residents were food insecure. That's much higher than 13% statewide and 11% nationwide. And as is true for most cities, racial and ethnic disparities widen when considering the 6 historically defined low-income neighborhoods, which are predominantly Black and brown communities. The City of New Haven Food System Policy Division was established in 2016, and I came on board to lead the division at the end of 2018. And for some of you, this may be the first time you're hearing about a role like this, and that's not a surprise. There are approximately only 20 other food policy directors housed in municipal government throughout the United States. Since this division is quite new and there were no explicit mandates, I had a lot of flexibility to shape the city's work around food and ag policy. Something that we must all understand, and it's already been mentioned several times, is that slavery and colonization have enabled and ensured the growth and development of the food and ag system in the US. Therefore, food systems transformation is inseparable from rectifying these harms by dismantling racism and other structural injustices. This requires a few things. For example, we need equity and access to land, sustenance, and power in the food system. Black farmers currently operate around 1% of the nation's farms, having lost over 12 million acres to USDA discrimination and legal maneuvering. 85% of the people working the land in the US are Latinx migrant workers, yet only 2.5% of farms are owned and operated by Latinx people. People of color are disproportionately likely to live under food apartheid and suffer from diabetes, heart disease, and other diet-related illnesses. And labor laws continue to permit the exploitation of farm and food workers. We also must reverse industrial agriculture's damage to the planet and harm to vulnerable communities. Industrial ag is responsible for over a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions, 70% of water use, and 37% of land use. Environmental impacts of climate change, pesticide exposure, and toxic pollutants harm communities of color disproportionately. And regenerative farming practices rooted in traditional wisdom and technologies could be part of the solution to growing food without undermining ecology. These practices have been ignored, erased, or appropriated by mainstream society. Finally, it is time to authentically address the history of oppression that has disconnected our communities from land. A history of land-based oppression and forced migration have resulted in the concentration of people of color in disinvested neighborhoods and urban environments. So given this as a division, our mission is to support and help manifest community-led efforts that envision and create an environmentally sustainable and socially just food system. We operate through a food justice framework and across these three thematic pathways: health equity, socioeconomic justice, and environmental justice. The core of these three themes spotlight our goal of developing and supporting anti-racist food farming and land use policies. Food is our most intimate and powerful connection to each other, to our cultures, and to the earth. And to transform our food system is to take one big step towards mitigating harm to our bodies, our economy, and our environment. For example, New Haven has a long history of urban ag, with many of its community gardens starting in the 1980s. A recent study found that over 80% of New Haven's residents live within half a mile of a community garden, urban farm, or farmer's market. Notably, the majority of these farms and gardens are concentrated in the lowest income and most racially diverse neighborhoods. Despite these achievements, there are several municipal and systemic barriers that prevent urban ag from fully thriving in New Haven. These barriers include city processes that are opaque and cumbersome, non-existent and outdated zoning and land use policies, including the remnants of racist practices such as redlining, difficulty accessing knowledge and financial resources, and the threat of gentrification. These systemic barriers prevent residents, especially Black and Brown communities, from fully experiencing the benefits that urban ag offers. Given these barriers and challenges, over the course of the next 3 years, my division is developing the first New Haven Urban Ag Master Plan, an effective, responsive, transparent, fair, efficient, user-friendly, and predictable but flexible plan to access land and opportunities, particularly in areas that have vacant or underutilized land and low access to food. In the short term, our project will improve access to resources and land tenure. In the long term, through our community engagement and ownership model, we will alleviate disparities in representation and leadership. Our work around this is rooted in equity, community involvement, and ownership, and protection against displacement. Urban ag has the potential to help ameliorate many pressing issues, but this can only be done if policy and zoning reform are done in collaboration with communities it impacts. We should not rely solely on top-down policymaking. A community advisory board of up to 60 paid members, consisting of everyday residents who hold valuable skills and expertise in their neighborhoods, their peers, and their fields of interest, will guide our inclusive community-driven process. If people are having difficulty navigating these processes and accessing this information, residents won't have the knowledge or tools to demand change or build resilience and establish sovereignty within the food system. Ultimately, I believe that all people in all communities should have the right to the means to produce, procure, prepare, share, and eat food that's nutritionally and culturally appropriate, free from exploitation of themselves, other people, and non-human animals, and in harmony with the rest of the natural world. And yeah, I think I'll stop there because I think that really gives us an example of some of my work and how we can address food sovereignty.
Thank you so much for that. Makes me anxious to take a road trip to New Haven and see this work in action. Commissioner Liberty, I think that you have a pretty unique vision for the role of the Department of Corrections can play in the regional food system. Could you describe that vision and how it relates to the personal resilience of residents in Maine State Correctional Facilities?
Sure. In 2020, as with most industries, we had a very challenging year, and corrections during a pandemic is certainly challenging. In January, we began the planning and educational process to educate and train our staff and our residents in our care to ensure that we were able to execute a good plan to keep everyone safe. We educated our staff and residents and retrofitted our industry production from producing wood products, furniture, other items to the manufacturing of personal protective gear, which we use in our facilities. We used in the judiciary. We brought to food pantry soup kitchens. We brought to Department of Agriculture for our farmers to ensure that they were protected. In 2020, we produced more than 200,000 face covering shields, gowns, and plexiglass shields that were made for many of the partners that I had mentioned. Throughout the year, we had several outbreaks, including staff and residents, and we overcame many of the challenges. And I was amazed by the resiliency of my team, which includes the residents in our care. Everyone was very tolerant and did well in trying to keep the facility safe. To give you an example of resiliency and the difficulty and the challenges that were faced by the residents and the staff, the people in our care at times during outbreaks were locked into their cells for 23.5 hours a day, only coming out for personal hygiene to make a quick call home. And very challenging for them, but we work collaboratively to work through that. Many of my 1,200 staff were without daycare due to the pandemic, and we were resilient as an organization, and the Maine Department of Corrections actually opened our own state licensed daycare centers for our employees. And I'm pleased to announce that our dedicated approach to the protection of our staff and residents was successful. Our infection rate inside the facilities leads the nation, in fact. This year required resiliency. It was a time of uncertainty. It was a time of reflection and heightened awareness of social inequities. This year, as a result of my own and others' reflections, we dedicated much of our time and resources to implicit bias training, equity awareness, policy modification, and other work to educate ourselves so we're more informed and more sensitive and able to manage our population in a more unbiased way. During that process, we educated our staff and our residents in implicit bias, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I created a new position to manage that for us, which we previously did not have at the central office level. And key leaders participated in many seminars, trainings, and were able to discuss and educate themselves on inequities in our system and in our communities. Over the past year, 160 of our key leaders have participated in semester-long programs which informed us and grew our organization as it relates to inequities in our community and in our system. As it relates to the Maine Department of Corrections agricultural program, in 2015, I was awarded the Maine State Prison, and when I arrived, I recognized that many of our organics were going out the back of the building into a dumpster, and we were paying someone $140,000 a year for the disposal of those organics. We feed 5,000 meals a day, and so you can imagine the organics that were wasted. We began a process of composting, and those organics are now composted and rotated back in the soil. And we began the journey of enhanced agricultural operation through all of my 6 facilities in the state of Maine. The goals for the Maine Department of Corrections agriculture program were to have self-sustainment in the area of fresh produce, to reduce our carbon footprint, reducing the need to transport industrial agricultural products from the Midwest and West in order to feed my staff and residents in our facilities. We wanted to enhance the nutritional offerings for our residents in the facilities. We wanted to make critical contributions to the food insecure in the communities, and we wanted to leverage community-based governmental assets to help us in that endeavor. And we did that. I reached out to the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and they began training through the Master Gardener program, many of our residents, and we currently have 60 of our incarcerated Mainers that are Master Gardeners in our facilities, which are doing that work now. We also have 55 graduates of the Maine Compost School. We're doing all of our internal composting and rotating that back in the soil as an augmentation. And we've also collaborated with 5 community-based nurseries and greenhouses, and they've donated more than 20,000 seedlings to our operations, allowing us to provide enhanced nutritional food to our residents. We've also, one of our goals is to providing a redemption for our clients through the therapeutic practice of raising vegetables and the donation of those foods to the Maine and those individuals in Maine that are food insecure through our food pantries. At the Maine Department of Corrections, I have a $1.4 million food purchasing budget, and I've directed that all of my food service managers appropriate 25% of their budget to purchase locally grown foods, recycling those tax dollars back into the community and assisting our local farmers. That total amount that's now spent in the local economy to our farmers is about $350,000, and has been a significant boost to their efforts and helping them with a sustainable operation. We, in addition to that, we also have 15 beehives in our facilities, 65 certified beekeepers in those 6 facilities. And that's a very popular program. We've produced approximately 60 pounds of honey last year that is available to our residents in our care. Last year, we were able to produce about 445,000 pounds of agricultural products in those 6 facilities. And we also grew our 10,000 seedlings. The number of pounds of produce that we're able to put into the community from our facilities was about 25,000 pounds of fresh vegetables, and it was a great augmentation to what they had already received. We raised 1,300 bushels of apples that were delivered to our residents, and they were able to eat fresh. And we also donated 600 pounds of fresh beef to the community surrounding the Baltic Correctional Facilities. Our residents are proud of the accomplishments of being able to learn about agriculture. They're able to learn a skill set. They are a part of a Department of Labor apprenticeship program, and using all of the information and training that I previously mentioned to be able to take that skill set, use it in the agricultural community back home, and to have their own ability to raise their own fresh produce in their homes. It gives them a sense of accomplishment when they're able to donate the vegetables to the community, and has a restorative, redemptive sort of feel, I believe, and assist them in their journey as they search for redemption. I believe in redemption. I believe in giving the ability for these individuals to earn redemption, and they do that through giving back to the community, and have a sense of pride when they raise the vegetables and they're able to feed themselves and others. I think that they're most proud of and most pleased with being able to change the culture. As I mentioned in my introductory statement about humanizing and normalizing the correctional environment, to have the Maine State Prison, which is every piece of sod has been tilled and is being farmed and gardened, and be able to provide those fresh vegetables, which are picked literally hours prior to, and provide the residents with endless salad bar and bring the nutritional value that does, bring heirloom tomatoes as opposed to industrially produced tomatoes out west is priceless. And so we're very pleased to be able to do that. We continue to grow this effort, and we're currently working on a processing center that can process locally produced vegetables for our local farmers and for the products that we produce, and to distribute those to the Department of Agriculture, to our schools, to the veterans homes, to the community food pantries, and into ourselves. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Commissioner Liberty. Jesse, at Farm Fresh Rhode Island, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, you had to radically update your programming to better serve the farmers and eaters that you represent. Can you talk about that rapid cycle innovation and how it strengthened Farm Fresh's organizational resilience?
Sure, thanks, Laura. For the last decade, Farm Fresh Rhode Island's Mark Mobile program has worked hard to transform the power dynamics of wholesale distribution to better benefit local and regional growers. Markamobile is a transparent, grower-focused marketplace where farmers and food producers set their own prices online, and where wholesale buyers, traditionally, folks like chefs, grocers, institutional purchasers, connected directly. Farm Fresh aggregates and distributes orders on behalf of a network of over 135 growers and producers. And through this work, we aim to put more local and regional food within reach, and also put more money back into the local economy and the bank accounts of these small and family-owned businesses. Within the span of a week in March 2020, we saw about 80% of our wholesale customers either shut their doors or send students home from university dining halls. At that moment, after some deep conversations with our team, we decided to make the switch that our operations needed to do to evolve from a warehouse and delivery routes at that time, which could handle about 200 wholesale customers a week, to something that could accommodate the interest of over 2,000 home delivery customers weekly. In a sense, we switched from getting out to a small number of people comparatively, and instituted home delivery and curbside pickup at a scale that we thought that we could manage and step up over time. We made a lot of mistakes. We learned from them and we tried to get better each week. Our team put in a lot of long hours. There's a lot of learning. We have a lot of programs at Markamobile in addition to at Farm Fresh in addition to Markamobile. And we saw staff and team members from all parts of the organization jump in to help keep this distribution system running and really provide critical services during the shelter-in-place period of the pandemic. We saw this as a sales outlet for farmers who had just seen their business models change overnight too. And we had to do all of this while implementing and improving our safety protocols and plans on what sometimes felt like a daily basis. New information was emerging, and we were all learning how to best combat the virus and the spread of the virus. And from my perspective, also trying to figure out how to ensure the safest workplace possible for the folks that we were still asking to come in on a day-to-day basis. Over the span of a few months, we scaled up rapidly. We hired and trained over 15 new employees, all with new COVID safety protocols and just an understanding of how we all needed to work together and what those changes meant. And in a warehouse setting that was already becoming too small for us as we were scaling up and out of our old facilities, 6 feet of distancing, understanding how you lift heavy things, whether that's a team lift and doing that safely, all of those things became greater challenges than they were just months ago. So at the same time that we were working to help the growers that we work with, we were also working with a multitude of partners to address the increasing food insecurity in our state. One of the things we were able to do was work with the state of Rhode Island to pilot SNAP sales for home delivery. And through that pilot, we were also able to take our bonus bucks program, which we run at our farmers markets, and bring that to home delivery as well. That's a one-to-one match for any recipient of SNAP that makes a purchase. They get $1 for fresh fruits and vegetables as well. This one-to-one match that we brought to Markamobile was able to increase the spending power of SNAP customers in Rhode Island by over $150,000 during the pandemic. In May, we worked with the Rhode Island Food Policy Council, the Rhode Island Community Food Bank, the Division of Agriculture, as well as Rhode Island's congressional delegation to apply for and secure a contract with the USDA to ensure that coronavirus food assistance programs funds came into the state. And for us, that came in the form of a locally sourced USDA Farmers to Family food box. From May until September, Farm Fresh Rhode Island packed over 1,000 boxes a week with local produce, meat, and dairy from Rhode Island and New England, and deliver them to our food bank. While the overall policies and rollout of this program at a federal level was and remains very problematic, we worked with our group of partners to find a way to make the most of this opportunity in Rhode Island and to connect local growers into the emergency food system at a time of great need. In September, our contract was not renewed because the Trump administration abruptly changed the rules of the program and made our approach to the work, which prioritized connections between local growers and eaters, less competitive in the contract process. We ultimately didn't have our contract renewed. Despite this setback, we forged a very positive working relationship with the food bank during this time. We were able, through the partnership with the food bank, funding from the Rhode Island Foundation and other partners, to keep supplying local hunger relief organizations with fresh local produce from local and regional growers. Currently, on a week-to-week basis, we work with a network of over 25 food pantries in Rhode Island, delivering fresh food that they choose from our Market-Mobile program from a network of growers. We also work with Hope's Harvest, a gleaning project based in Providence, and we work to amplify each other's efforts and make the most efficient use of our cold storage and vehicles. What made much of these rapid iterations possible is that over the past decade, we made investments and dedicated our time and talents to building an alternative to business as usual. Yes, we invested in traditional infrastructure like trucks, coolers, pallet jacks, and lifts, but we also invested our energy into building technology systems in-house. The Market-Mobile technology platform, currently under the process of a complete redesign, was built over a decade ago, and we've been striving to improve it over time. Needless to say, the last thing that we wanted to do was open up this aging system to the general public, warts and all. However, that was exactly what was called for at the moment and the best tool that we had at our disposal. It proved to be flexible enough to handle the increased demand, and with some quick fixes, we were able to cobble together something that was able to get food out to people who were in shelter-in-place orders. I would say that these major investments, in addition to years of experience on our team of problem solving, allowed us to really step up in a moment when we can do some good. There are a lot of other things that happened last year, farmers market settings and at our Harvest Kitchen program and with community education. And I think what was really beautiful at our organization was that this was a time when we saw all of our work come together and really take on greater meaning. Our organization really talks about having a systems-based approach to working in food and agriculture. And I think what was so great was to see how each of these programs changed or came to the table with new ideas or helped each other out and really helped Farm Fresh feel, like one organization working towards common goals in a time when it was really needed. So thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. I can't resist the urge to add that my cooler is out on my front porch and we're looking forward to our Market-Mobile delivery any minute now. So many thanks to the work of you and your staff in helping make that possible for communities all around the state. Reverend Mariama, in your multiple talks around the region, you talk about building a movement of eaters. Could you talk about why that's a critical distinction and how it connects to your frame of ecological justice?
Yeah, so it's been really great and exciting because each of the folks that have talked before me have really talked about how the local food movement can reach folks in prison and low-income communities, folks who are on SNAP. Like, there's a lot of innovation happening in this space. But I think a lot of us know that that's not actually the large majority of where the local food movement is focused. And so, I am part of the local food movement. I also am going to pick up my Farmers to You bag, and I get food from north of Boston, and I like 3 different things. My husband and I have gotten to the point over this year where we eat 90% local food. Whatever we can't buy locally, I make my own homemade ketchup. So I'm one of those, I'm like a canner and all that stuff, right? But the reality is that, first of all, a lot of that knowledge has been lost. Very few people know how to can. I've been in a couple of instances where I've run into someone, usually an older person, for whom, and like have hour-long conversations about canning and the joys, but that's not what most of us have access to. And the challenge has been, our movement has been overwhelmingly oriented to folks who can afford to pay $2 a head for garlic, folks like me who can, people who garden, and I'm in all of those categories. So for me personally, that may not in theory be a problem, but for me as an organizer, I don't think that's the most effective approach for us to build this food systems revolution. And so one of my calls in this work has been to move our orientation from a movement of growers to a movement of eaters. And I want to note that I don't say a movement of consumers, but a movement of eaters. Because when we build a movement of consumers at the current construction that we have, we only can invite those people that are willing to pay, willing and able to pay $2 for a head of garlic. But if we invite everyone from the point of view that they have a fundamental human need to eat, and we ask, how can that process of eating, of cooking, of sharing food be a process that ties us more deeply together as a community, then that changes our orientation of what we're talking about. One of the things we've been talking, we're doing a pilot project this summer as part of Mass Renews. We have some legislation. We were really excited, and I don't know about other states, but our legislators have a tendency to say, this is so great. We'll introduce it this session. It won't pass. It won't even really actually be looked at, but we're gonna introduce it, and then we're gonna talk about next session. Maybe then we can get our turn. One of the challenges for us was, well, people are thinking about this right now in this current COVID crisis. For the first time, I think a lot of us have had to face the deep inequities and the vulnerability of our food system. People are showing up at food banks who've never gone there before. Folks are paying attention for the first time of what it takes to keep those shelves stocked. And if we wait 2 years from now, I love our people, but they'll be on to the next. And so we have an opportunity right now to build a movement, to take the things that people are learning, the conversations that are happening around our dinner tables, and convert them into a movement for a more just and a more sustainable food system. So we want everybody who eats to be engaged in the conversation. In my own family, we have a tradition of praying before we eat our meal. And always we ask for blessings on everybody who played a role in getting the food to our plate. And we have a system, and it's not just, in our food system. I say to people often, most of us, if we looked in the back of our clothes, we would notice that our clothes were made in places where it's highly likely that unjust sweatshop labor was used to make that clothing. If we walked in the store and we saw people being abused, we would walk right out and be unwilling to purchase it. But because we can walk in and there's bright lights and a mannequin and a sexy connection between the earrings and the outfit, and all of those things seem well presented, we're able to ignore. And that's been true in our food system because it was packaged with much more plastic than it ever needed, and on shelves with bright lights, people have been able to ignore. But I think we have so many of us waking up, and now is the moment to say a better way is possible. So we are looking at how we can engage folks. We have a lot of the folks that we're engaging with, they have gardens or are growing, that's true. But also we've been reaching out to our social service agencies, many of whom are mobilizing to get more people on SNAP, knowing that a lot of this emergency COVID relief is phasing out, and knowing that people are not actually, there's many communities where folks are not bouncing back nearly as quickly, communities where large numbers of people worked in hospitality, which is not coming back at the scale that it was for at least a year, in some cases 2 to 3 years. So how do we make sure that people have the support they need over the long term? And many of those folks are signing people up for SNAP. We're asking them, don't just sign them up for SNAP. Can you make sure they know about the HIP program? That's the Healthy Incentives Program that we have here in Massachusetts. And that program allows folks to use their SNAP benefits so that for every dollar they spend on their SNAP benefits, they get matched with $1. I know other states have similar programs. In our state, it's a pilot. It's a pilot that just keeps getting renewed. And because it's a pilot, we can't do some of the structural changes. There's so many great things about it, and there's some challenges. some challenges around how easy it is to get certified, some challenges around even some of the transactional issues. And because it's a pilot, the state hasn't really devoted the human resources and the policies like data collection and marketing that we should have been doing. So we're asking a lot of our social service agencies, you're signing up people for SNAP anyway, can you tell them about HIP? We have actually got two groups of young people, one group that has young people who speak English and Vietnamese and another young people that speak English and Spanish, to create social media toolkits so that they can plug and play. Here's a flyer, you can plop your information into it. Here's an online JPEG that you can just put up on your website. Let's make it very easy for folks who already care about low-income folks to be able to easily help them do this. And then our goal is we would like the HIP program to run out of money. And we want it to run out of money the quickest it ever has this year. Because you know, the squeaky wheel gets oiled. We know that if we can make it run out of money, some of those legislators who are telling us to wait our turn and we're going to get to that next cycle will be forced to take this a little bit more seriously, make that HIP program a permanent program, and then we can also focus on shifting some of the things that need to be expanded, like what the caps are and how easy it is for people to access. So we are turning these farmers markets into sites of organizing. How about we recognize that people are coming to get their basic needs, but we can engage them as citizens and advocates to move our food system in a different way. And we're hoping that we can move just beyond, sort of some of the charity model that has been existing within the food system to say, this is a fundamental human right, and we could radically shift our system so that we don't have to have hunger anymore. But that means lots of shifts in our policies. So that is what I mean in terms of building a movement of eaters, is that moving these policy conversations beyond those of us who, are like really into it, or this is the work that we do, into the consciousness of every single person who lifts food to their mouth, and seeing this as a place where we can work out some of the calls we've had for racial justice, where we can begin to think how we make our society more economically equitable. There's so many things we can do in our food system, and it is the basic system, one that we all need. Housing also, we could talk about that another time, but we believe that there is no such thing as a human being that's not an eater. And so if we are a movement of eaters, we invite everyone in to not just the conversation, but to take action to transform our system.
Thank you so much for those comments. And even though time is precious, I want to take a minute to let the nutrients of this conversation settle in my body before rolling to the next question to close our session today. So I'm going to take a breath myself and just enjoy being in the presence of such great thinkers. And we'll keep breathing in those nutrients over the course of the day, I'm certain. But thank you so much for this conversation. So we heard it in Reverend Mariama's comments, and we see it in the newspaper headlines. I think so many of us feel like this is our moment. The moment is now. We've been thinking and studying and organizing and building to a moment where people are paying attention and ready to take action and able to engage in a way that might not have been possible before. And that's exciting, it's exhausting, but anchoring so many of those conversations is a sensation of hope that feels renewed despite the seriousness of the challenges we face. So I want to close our conversation today by giving each of our panelists an opportunity to reflect on what gives you hope when you're looking forward to the next push. And we'll start with Commissioner Liberty.
Thank you. I would like to say that I would like to be in the congregation of the Reverend. Your comments today were truly a gift to me. I am hopeful for the sustained dialogue and efforts related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the discussions about racial injustice, obviously very fundamental to the work that I do, and the heightened awareness and the efforts that are taking place both locally here in the state of Maine and nationally. I'm also hopeful for the national efforts of state legislatures throughout the nation that are working to reduce mass incarceration and reinvesting some of those funds back into the community for programming and treatment, diverting from incarceration and all the trauma that incarceration causes. I'm also hopeful for the reduced reliance on incarceration for our youth and the work that's being done to divert them from being incarcerated. I'm also hopeful for the heightened awareness of the importance of our food producers in our communities. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that reflection. Latha, if we could hear from you next.
Yeah, thank you. I did mention that sometimes this type of question is a bit difficult for me because often I do not feel very hopeful, which, comes with many things. But I have observed that out of the devastating events of the past year, including the pandemic, adverse climate catastrophes, and the continued violence against BIPOC communities that are baked into the way our society is structured in the US, there is a now broader social awareness around systems thinking. And this is mentioned by the other panelists, especially in terms of systems of oppression and corporate and capitalist systems as it relates to climate change in our food system. I have observed that people are also more aware of how the food system impacts their life, especially as it relates to supply chains and the food and farm workers who ensure that we all have food to eat. People have been exposed to the systems that are in play rather than just the food that's right in front of them. So I think these awakenings give those of us already doing this work, all of us on this panel, all of you in the audience, this gives us an opportunity to bring more people along with us for the cause. We can train more community food system advocates that think about and aim to tackle root causes and upstream interventions and not just short-term downstream band-aids. I think it's really important to, consider this as a both and approach so that there is recognition that critical social safety nets are required and won't be going away anytime soon, but we also must work and organize around systems change and removing barriers to, mitigating harm against communities and removing structural violence from the society that we live in. So that gives me hope. I'm excited that people are thinking more in systems. And I'm encouraged by how many people are interested in this work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I know there are days when this question lands differently than others. So thanks for working with it. I appreciate that. Jesse, I'd love to hear from you.
Oh gosh, last year was really it was mind-blowing in so many ways, and like emotionally tough for me, I think, to find the centering on a day-to-day basis to go into work and to work with a group of people who were putting themselves out there day in and day out on behalf of something that they knew was important. And I think what inspired me and kept me getting up every morning early and getting in on time and just doing what I needed to do was that I got to work with a really great group of people at the organization that I work at. Like I mentioned before, we brought on a lot of new folks during the pandemic, and what I got to see day in and day out with folks that had been at the organization and new people that had joined us was an amazing group of young and emerging leaders in our organization that were stepping up and stepping into really difficult challenges and doing it with a lot of grace, a lot of determination, and just a lot of presence. You know, we had a lot of conversations of what it meant to, you know, just be out there every day when everyone else was, not everyone else, but like when a lot of folks had the luxury of being at home, and knowing that for our team that wasn't an option. But we really banded together, and I think in the process also had fun and tried to do it as safely as possible. So it gives me hope, because I know that this young group of leaders that got to experience something last year that a lot of folks never had the chance to experience in a workplace will be able to take those lessons that they learned and take them into their next phase of their career, wherever they go. And hopefully it's a way of keeping all of our eyes open as we think about future problems and challenges that are coming up. I think I'm also really inspired by something that Reverend Mariama mentioned earlier. The hope that this moment, that this past year was a wake-up call about where our food comes from and how it gets to our tables, and who made it possible to get it there. And I hope that we don't waste this opportunity to really just think about that every time that we eat, think about that every time that we go to the grocery store, think about that every time we go to a farmer's market, and be really thankful and grateful for the fact that there's systems in place in New England that we need to grow and change and make better, but that we also have a basis to build off of. But we need to build on it in a way that's not just for a few folks, not just for folks of means, but for everyone. And my hope is that in Rhode Island that we don't go back to business as usual, and that we can use this moment as a time to talk to policymakers and legislators about the investments that need to be made in our state and in our region to really make sure that what we saw happen this last year doesn't happen again, and that we learn from where the flaws in the systems are and make it stronger.
Thank you for that, Jesse. And Reverend Mariama, love to hear what gives you hope in this moment.
So I want to start with this panel giving me hope. Latha, I identify with how much suffering there is, but I also want to name that there was a time when the person in charge of food justice wouldn't have looked like you, and would not have carried that same burden, would not have come from such a deep place of love and caring. Commissioner, my family's had its disproportionate connection with the criminal justice system, and most of the folks I've interacted with have not come from the same vision or sense of possibility that you bring to your work. Jesse, when I think about that truck bringing people food and hope and love and dropping it off on their porch, and even if you can't touch each other, feeling each other connected through the things that sustain us. So there is so much hope. And I never, ever share scripture because I know my tradition has done so much harm to so many people. But every once in a while, there's something that really speaks. And we've been looking in the book of Job, and Job is the story of a man who loses everything, his family, his business, his health, everything is taken away from him. And there is this moment where he says, "For there is hope for a tree. If it is cut down, that it will sprout again, and that its shoots will not cease. Though its roots grow old in the earth, and its stump dies in the ground, yet at the scent of water, it will bud and put forth branches like a young plant." We have experienced so much suffering. And it's not just this year, it was far before this year, but this year has just taken it to the umpteenth degree. And yet in the midst of that suffering, I feel like I can smell the scent of water. And I know that I come from people who had a whole lot less than what I had, and held out hope that even though they would not see freedom or justice, they imagined I would be. And in that, I am able to continue working for justice. So I'm excited because I talked to my goddaughter, and she asked me when we're going strawberry picking. And I'm so excited that all my godchildren, I have 9 of them, know what a strawberry plant looks like. And they know what it means when we get together and the youngest of them has to wear an outfit that can sustain all the strawberry juice that ends up on their face and on their clothes. And the idea that she's getting older and now she doesn't have to use the butter knife anymore, so she can help make jam together because she's a big girl now. And so, yes, there's so much suffering, but I believe the scent of water is there. And I believe new shoots are springing up. And I'm really thankful to be in the company of people who are bringing those shoots to be in our region.
A couple more deep breaths while I collect myself. Let a moment of gratitude for you all, Commissioner Liberty, Latha, Swamy, Jesse Rye, Reverend Mariama, not just for your time today, but the conversations that went into preparing this panel and preparing your remarks and landing this ship on time with such powerful and thoughtful comments. So just thank you all for the work that you're doing that informed this conversation and brought it to life. I'm so excited about where we went in this hour and how it might frame conversations later today. Want to direct people, if you have thoughts and reflections about resilience and this journey we've just been on together, to bring those to the facilitated networking sessions this afternoon, particularly the one on food sovereignty. But if you're planning to attend another, weave this conversation into those workshops this afternoon at 1. And I'd just like to say, as a longtime attendee of the FINE Summit and of the advisory board, one of the things that gives me hope is how much this conference has evolved in the many times I've attended it. And, just this conversation, this feels new. It feels like a new version of this network and a new insight that really is laying the foundation for the kind of hopeful future that we all just painted. So thank you all for being a part of that and marking that in time, and to the rest of the staff and advisory board that have put in the hours and the conversations that have helped us evolve as a network to bring a conversation like this to the region. So thank you all. Thanks to folks who are attending. I thought I might be a little tired after such intense focus first thing in the morning, but I'm jazzed and ready to go into the next sessions. And so I look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks, everyone.